Hey, what's up, horror kids? All right, so this is Rikk R Treat, and I'm being a lazy fuck and doing this video out of my bed. So, I'm about to tackle a question that I did some research for and really struggled to kind of develop an answer that was worth watching. So, the question was, is the genre new grave a positive thing for horror punk? Now, for those who may not know what New Grave is, I'll give you a little bit of background information and then kind of explain my point on the topic. So, New Grave, in this context, is a genre that the magazine Kerrang put together for an article they did, which includes bands like New Year's Day, Creeper, Fort Hope, Dead, and I've also seen William Control from Aiden on there, and Fearless Vampire Killers. Also, Ashes to Angels. So, for those of you who are listening and don't really know any of these bands, check a few of them out. I personally do enjoy most of the music that these bands have put out. However, in doing this research and reviewing what these bands sound like, I figured that there is no cohesiveness to this genre. Um, so, for example, New Year's Day is a metalcore band, for the lack of a better description. Female fronted. The aesthetic that they have is goth and horror inspired, and they have some, references to it in their music and in the sound that they have. Creeper is basically the offspring of Alkaline Trio and old school AFI. Fearless Vampire Killers kind of sounds like a modern My Chemical Romance. And Fort Hope and Dead were kind of off for me because they don't have like a dark quality to them. They basically sound like a regular post-hardcore or alternative rock band, at least in my opinion. Maybe I just wasn't listening to the right songs. They also included, or I've also seen on Kerrang's Twitter, that they include the band She Will Burn as New Grave as well, and they sound like a black metal version of Carnifex. Um, so if you can tell, the sort of thing holding all these a few of these bands together is dark, um like dark aesthetics. If you were to watch the videos that they put out, most of them, aside from the ones I listed, Fortnite and Dead, wear black, they wear makeup, they, you can tell that they have a horror and goth influence, um, by the way they look. So the question is something that I guess I've heard in a lot of different avenues, specifically more specifically in um, the goth community, is can you be goth without listening to the music? Does the aesthetic is the aesthetic enough? I think these bands kind of play into that, where I would argue that they're probably influenced by goth and horror punk music. Um, However, an issue that I feel lies with it, which may or may not be a big deal, I mean, I don't really think it's a big deal, but that's just me. I know that others do, is because of these bands looking this way and not really sounding like traditional goth or horror punk bands, are they inviting posers into the scene? Um, Now, my response to that is I don't particularly think, I try not to think of people as posers. I think of people as needing to be educated more properly. So if someone thinks that, I don't know, an argument I hear a lot is people think Marilyn Manson is goth. Um, Personally, I can see why they would say that, but others are like super gung ho that it's a big deal and whatnot. So instead of getting pissed off about it, you just talk to the person and see if they know actual like traditional goth sounding bands. You know, if someone says that, who's a good example? I've heard someone say that Aiden was horror punk. Personally, I think that they're definitely an offshoot of horror punk. But if you're, more purist and, there's a specific, very, very specific way you define horror punk, then maybe you just tell that person, like, hey, like, check out these bands and, like, they're horror punk. Like, if they're into Aiden or, like, AFI or MyCam or whatever, and it's influenced by it, then maybe they, will like that horror punk band as well. Um, I think those are the baby bats, as they call them. You need to build the community by giving them the more traditional and more like influential bands instead of like tearing them down because they don't know they may or may not know what they're talking about in line with your beliefs. So all of this is a long-winded answer to say that in my opinion, New Grave is more like a marketing tool and it kind of seems like the horror punk's little brother who is trying to hang out with all the teenage girls. It's like a amalgamation of mall goth and those kind of bands, something that takes that dark aesthetic and puts it to metal, post-hardcore, and what some would call emo. It just kind of goes from there. Now, I don't see that as an issue personally. My only issue is the way that Kerrang curated the band list. Personally, if I were to curate which bands were New Grave, I would keep them within that style. So whatever was called mall goth at one point, I think would fall perfectly within New Grave. Aiden, MyChem, Old School AFI, Old Wounds, Motionless in White, if New Year's Day, Creeper, Fearless Vampire Killers, Ashes to Angels, etc. Like within that sound, they all kind of have they have like very similar qualities. So I think that in my opinion is what New Grave is. However, if Kerrang just made it up to market it like grunge kind of was, they didn't do a very good job of it in my opinion. So, yeah, I guess I want to know what you guys think. Check out some of the bands that I listed and let me know, like, is New Grave a positive thing for horror punk? Is it a negative thing? Does it matter at all? Like, is it just a blip in time that no one's going to care about in 5 years? Who knows? I think that it has the potential, if it were done correctly, to become at least a parallel to the horror punk genre, and kind of work in the same way that horror punk does. Very small, very niche, very tight, putting out good bands, again, if done correctly. So aside from that, guys, I want to let you know that I have some really cool videos coming up that I'm going to start working on next week. And I apologize for not getting things out as quickly as I wanted to. I am as you may know, in grad school, so I'm doing my internship and I am swamped for time. Um, Aside from that, my band JXV is in the studio, and so I'm just really busy. Um, on that note, I also am going to be putting up some videos of us in the studio once we're finished, and hopefully you guys would be willing to check out the album we're putting out. All right, so as always, this is Rikk R Treat, and you've been watching The Pumpkin Patch. Later.